Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar. My name is Carrie Daly, and we will be going over persistent VDI today. And now I can hand it over to Josh, head of our engineering team.
So good morning, and thanks everyone for joining our webinar. And thanks, Carrie, for the introduction. As she mentioned, I'm Joshua Petty, and I'm the Senior Director of Worldwide Technical Services for Atlantis Computing. A little bit of background on myself. So I've been in the desktop space for a little over 15 years in server-based computing, and for over the last 10 years specifically focused on virtualization. I joined Atlantis not quite 3 years ago and have had just a blast working with this technology with customers, helping them to really revolutionize their environments. So I appreciate you joining us today to look at this technology for persistent VDI. A little bit about our technology and the value that we bring to the table. Atlantis is a software company that's based in the Silicon Valley in California. Not a new company by any stretch. We've got 350 customers with over 400,000 licenses sold. A great distribution chain through 130 resellers globally. It's an award-winning technology that you may have noticed won Best of VMworld in the United States in 2012, as well as Best of VMworld in Europe for our deployment of the solution with Colt. We also won Best of Synergy 2012 and a Silver Award in 2012 for Storage Magazine Products of the Year. Now, because of that, we've forged some very strong relationships with some big partners like VMware, Citrix, IBM, HP, Dell, Cisco, and DCE. Now, the reason for that is that because we're the secret sauce or the enabling technology for some of the biggest deployments of VDI on the planet. JPMorgan Chase, for example, has an enormous number of desktops, over 90,000 desktops in production running on our technology. And some of these other names that you'll recognize, Colt, Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, and U.S. Army, are also scaling well into the tens of thousands of desktops on our technology. So what is Atlantis ILIO for persistent VDI? Atlantis is a software-only solution that supports Citrix and VMware VDI, and is designed to optimize the way VMs interact with storage. So we reduce the overall cost of storage in VDI environments, we boost performance, and we simplify and de-risk the environments. As we go through the presentation today, hopefully you'll see the value that we bring to the table, particularly for persistent VDI. For VDI projects, it's very important to make all of the stakeholders happy. To begin with, let's focus on the users. What makes the users happy? Well, for users, mobility is important. And it's not just about the ability to be able to move around and get to their data from anywhere, but it's about having that same user experience. So users want to be able to access their desktops and their data from home, from iPads, from all kinds of devices, but still have that same consistent user experience. And the user experience needs to be better than a PC. For instance, if you log in from an iPad, you don't want to sacrifice performance. You want to have that same type of user experience from anywhere and any device. Now, what about the IT organization? For an IT organization, there's a different set of standards that make them happy. One is the desire to simplify the operations and avoid things like PC refresh. It's an enormous hassle every 3 years or 4 years to go out and place a 50 or 60-pound device on every single user's desk, much less to go out and manage that in the interim. So you want technologies, or an IT organization wants technologies that are easier to manage, and they're also proven and reliable. The other thing that they're looking for out of a VDI project is the ability to be highly available and have disaster recovery. That's one of the things that's missing in most desktop technologies. Availability is there, but disaster recovery is often missing. And so VDI often offers the promise of things like disaster recovery. Well, what about other stakeholders like the CFO? Well, cost is one of the most important considerations there. So CapEx, how do we lower the cost of a VDI solution to be lower than a PC? Not just the initial capital outlay or the CapEx, but the ongoing operational costs, things like the OpEx, things like data center floor space, power, cooling. How do we get that in a VDI solution to be cheaper than the cost of placing a desktop out on everyone's desk? And then also, how do we reduce the risk? How do we avoid all of these hidden costs that we may not know about up front in a VDI solution? See, these are the things that people are looking for in a VDI solution. How do we get that better than physical user experience without sacrificing manageability and operability and without breaking the bank when it comes to cost? So this presents some unique challenges and risks. To do it right introduces a lot of cost and complexity. There's cost in the storage infrastructure and there's cost in the networking infrastructure. And then how do we deliver that user experience that's equal to or better than a PC? That's certainly a big challenge. And then how do we get rid of all of these risks? There are a lot of risks that can derail a VDI project, and we'll talk about where those risks lie in a moment. How do we manage VDI at scale? Managing 100 virtual machines on a couple of servers can be intimidating, but managing 1,000 or 5,000 or 10,000 can be very intimidating and calls for some unique training and skills. So how do we manage that challenge? How do we manage the risk associated with doing something like that? And then the need for high availability and rapid recovery. How do we mitigate those risks as well? Remember, that's one of the things that we're really looking for out of a VDI solution is that high availability and rapid recovery. But how do we build that into the project? How do we build it into the design without, again, introducing too much cost and then sacrificing that thing that we're looking for up front, which is getting the cost down to be lower than a PC? So with all of those challenges and risks, there's no surprise that a lot of VDI implementations and deployments have hit some rocky ground, so to speak, and failed. Gartner has released a report and commented on some of these challenges. One of the things they've said is that the #1 challenge associated with any server-hosted virtual desktop in their speak or VDI project is the lack of storage planning resulting in higher than expected storage costs. Now, they also commented that today storage represents 40% to 60% of the server-hosted virtual desktop budget, and in many cases is the barrier to entry. Now, here's a small graph on the VDI cost by component from that Gartner paper. Now, let's think about that for a moment. The storage represents 40 to 60% of the budget, and the #1 challenge is the lack of storage planning resulting in higher than expected storage costs. Now, they also commented that cost should be carefully balanced with user experience. Now, here's where this risk gets introduced, because we have to balance cost with user experience. The more storage we put into the environment, the better the user experience is going to be, but then the higher the cost is. If we provide a lot of storage, we get a great user experience, but we also introduce cost. So again, we jeopardize our project because we're introducing a lot of cost, and we're going against one of the drivers, which is to lower the cost below that of a PC. So when we throttle back the amount of storage we spend, now we're also throttling back the user experience. So now we're jeopardizing our other driver for our VDI project, which is give the users a better than physical PC user experience, or give them what they want. So this is why Gartner is saying that the #1 challenge associated is the lack of storage planning resulting in higher than expected storage costs. Storage is the #1 cause of these project failures. When we look at what Atlantis ILIO Software delivers in this context of storage planning and storage delivery for VDI, we can provide a lower cost than a physical PC. We can also provide a faster than physical PC user experience in VDI. We can lower the deployment risk and improve with automation. So we can get rid of a lot of the human element of risk that comes with all of this planning and implementation, manual implementation of physical storage by introducing software and automation. And we can also manage this at scale. So we're giving the IT organization what they're looking for, which is, automation, tools to help them to get to a more operationally ready state. And then we can enable high availability and disaster recovery. We'll talk a bit more about that in a few moments. But to begin with, let's talk about what the CFO is really looking for, that lower cost. When we look at a traditional persistent VDI architecture, to do it right, to give you a user experience that's even equal to that of a physical PC, is often around $1,000 to $2,000 per desktop or per VDI session. Extremely expensive. Doing the same thing with Atlantis ILIO can cut the CapEx and OpEx down by about 80%. This graph that you're looking at represents a 1,000 user example. And what you'll notice here is that the first thing we'll talk about is performance. And you'll see number of IOPS per desktop. You'll see that abbreviation there, IOPS, a few times. That stands for IO operations per second. That's how we measure storage performance. But IOPS per desktop, you'll see, is virtually unlimited in the Atlantis ILIO solution because of how we're optimizing the storage, compared with that of traditional VDI, where you have a limited number of IOPS or limited amounts of storage performance. What you'll also notice is the storage savings that you get by using the Atlantis ILIO software, around 70% in this 1,000 user environment, which translates to $800,000 in storage savings over this 1,000 user environment. The cost per desktop in this particular use case was under $300 for the initial CapEx of software and servers. So this is a real-world example of how we can lower the CapEx, or we can give the CFO what they're looking for: lower initial cost and lower OpEx, or lower total cost of ownership for the VDI environment, actually getting it down below the cost of a physical PC, but delivering a better than physical user experience. Now, what about that user experience? A traditional PC gives you around 80 to 150 IOPS. So that's the user experience that we're targeting. Most traditional persistent VDI implementations, though, give users around 10 to 30 IOPS. So they're already set up really for failure because they're going to deliver a less than physical user experience. The Atlantis ILIO Persistent VDI solution can give you up to 5,000 IOPS per desktop. We're optimizing the storage that you've already got, and so you're going to get a much better user experience. Now the question is, though, what does that translate to for the users? Most users don't talk in terms of IOPS, so what are they going to see? Well, in terms of booting their Windows VM, a traditional persistent VDI environment, if it's sized well, is going to boot in about 2 minutes. In some cases, it's going to be much longer depending on how it was sized. In an Atlantis ILIO environment, what we'll see is boots in around 12 seconds, depending on what kind of storage that we've got behind it. So a much faster, crisper end-user experience. What about things like application launches? In a well-sized traditional persistent VDI environment, you might see an application launch of around 5 seconds, and that would be pretty good performance. In an Atlantis ILIO environment, what we normally see is instant application launches. So again, that's tangible results that your users can see and really appreciate, because this is what's going to make a difference in their day-to-day use of these VDI environments. And what about things like Outlook searches or Windows desktop searches? Honestly, these things consume so many IOPS that when most VDI administrators and architects create their VDI environments, they'll disable these features in the Windows image because they consume so much storage performance. With Atlantis ILIO, not only can you enable these features, but the results of these searches are usually nearly instant. So you can see that from a user experience, this is a better than physical PC experience, and certainly much, much better than traditional VDI on shared storage. Let's talk a moment about flexibility. With traditional persistent VDI, you're a bit limited in your options. You need big traditional storage. You need SANs. And it's difficult sometimes to integrate those components, and you need to have a lot of storage. What about with Atlantis ILIO? With ILIO, we're an optimization technology, and we can optimize pretty much anything that you've got in your environment. So if you've got RAM, we can optimize that server RAM and use it as primary storage for your persistent VDI sessions. Or if you've got local flash, we can optimize that for your persistent VDI images. Or if you have SAN or NAS, we can optimize that and really cut down on the amount of storage that you need in any of those cases. So that gives you a lot of flexibility. No more do you have to go back and buy shelves and shelves and shelves of SAN, but you can really leverage whatever kind of storage that you've got in the environment and use a lot less of it because of the patented technologies that we have to reduce the storage footprint of the VMs. Let's talk a moment about deployment time as well. With traditional persistent VDI, deployment time can be months to years, and this can lead to costly project delays. Gartner says that IT organizations have to carefully plan and size the storage infrastructure to avoid the server-hosted virtual desktop delays or deployment failures. This is the key. They have to carefully plan to avoid deployment failures. And this is the reason for these delays and why these things take so long. When you think about the balancing act, this delicate balancing act that architects have to play to figure out, how much storage is enough to give me an acceptable user experience, compared to how much storage is enough so that I don't overrun my budget, you can see that at some point they're going to hit that balance where they've got just barely enough storage that they can afford it and barely enough storage to keep the users from breaking down their office door with a battering ram. So that's the delicate balance. So to find out that balance, what they often have to do is deploy small pilot groups and go through lengthy user acceptance testing. They'll deploy a small pilot of 100 users, let it run for months, deploy small pilots of 500 users, let it run for months, a pilot of 1,000 users, and let it run for months. And you can kind of see where this is going. By the time they get to the point where they're ready to deploy 10,000 users, years have gone by. And that's what Gartner's talking about here. They have to carefully plan so that they avoid failures. But what that does is it puts them so far behind the adoption curve that the technology is nearly obsoleted by the time they figure out how it's sized. Now compare that with what Atlantis can deliver with ILIO Persistent VDI. This is a real-world example from one of our customers, BLP Law Firm. What Andrew Rice told us is that within 2 weeks of contacting Atlantis Computing, we deployed 1,400 virtual desktops using Atlantis ILIO to deliver a significantly faster desktop experience. This was an interesting use case. They're a London law firm, and with the Olympics coming in, they knew that they weren't going to be able to get their users into the office due to traffic and some of the shutdowns in the city. So they contacted us, and within 10 days, we had a complete 1,400 user virtual infrastructure in place. Now the reason for that is because of the way our software optimizes storage, it cuts out on all of that risk of potentially undersizing storage and not having enough performance. So they knew they would have plenty of performance, and because of the automation that we bring to the table, this automated deployment was able to get loads of users and loads of desktops provisioned and up and running in just a matter of a few days. So that's part of the value that Atlantis ILIO and this persistent VDI deployment brings to the table, the ability to get thousands of users up and running really in a matter of no time. Now let's talk a moment about some of these deployment risks as well. When we're talking about persistent VDI as compared to non-persistent VDI, persistent VDI requires lots of storage, loads and loads of SAN. So what does that mean from a deployment risk point of view? Well, persistence means more storage, and anytime you've got more storage and VDI, that means it's going to be difficult to size correctly. Large environments means that it adds an exponential or an order of magnitude to that problem. So you've got lots of storage that's difficult to size correctly, and it's complex to architect that much storage at scale. So we're introducing a lot of risk here. Even a 5% or a 10% margin of error translates into large performance problems and extremely large cost overruns. Now that additional storage also means that we have to size our storage network on par with the storage, which means that we've introduced risk there as well. Risk that the storage network wasn't sized properly, and potentially we've introduced storage network bottlenecks. Now all of this large storage infrastructure now is also difficult to manage at scale, and for disaster recovery, now we have to have duplicates of everything, which is extremely expensive. So you can see it's like a stack of dominoes. I have to have loads of storage, and for the storage I need storage networking. And if my storage capacity isn't sized right, and my storage throughput isn't sized right, and the storage network isn't sized right, if any one of those pieces isn't properly sized or properly architected, then I have this cascading effect that's going to cause failure in my environment. So the larger the environment with traditional VDI storage sizing and traditional VDI storage architecture, the larger the environment, the more risk I'm introducing, and the more moving parts there are that could potentially cause these cascading design failures. With Atlantis ILIO, we've simplified the architecture, and we eliminate all of that risk because we're cutting down drastically on the amount of storage that you need. Now, we're cutting the storage amount down by around 90%. So you need less storage. Anytime you need that much less storage, that means there's so many fewer moving parts to worry about. So you're eliminating lots of risk. You're eliminating a lot of the storage network, and so you're eliminating those bottlenecks. And we're leveraging local vSwitches primarily for most of the storage traffic. So we're taking most of the storage traffic off of your physical network in the first place. So we're eliminating those bottlenecks as well. So as you can see, Atlantis is simplifying the architecture, removing the risk, and really cutting down on those deployment risks for persistent VDI. So what they translate into for you is a pretty significant impact for your VDI environment. Here's some results from some benchmark testing that was done. The storage capacity reduction that we saw was 97%. So an image that may have taken 10 gig of storage on traditional SAN is now down under 1 gigabyte. So 97% storage reduction. So that translates into an enormous CapEx savings up front, but also a very strong operational savings because we're no longer paying for operational costs for all of those extra disks over the next 3 to 4 years of the lifespan of that SAN. What we've also seen is density and scalability improvements. So 125 persistent virtual desktops per blade on servers, storage 33 times more desktops per disk. So fantastic density improvements. But more than that, remember what the users are looking for. Users are looking for better than PC user experience. So the CFO's happy, the IT team is happy, but what about the users? That better than physical user experience really shows up here because we're getting 5 times faster desktop performance. That was measured through the Passmark tool. What we've also seen measuring with other tools is that while a typical VDI storage environment might be sized at 10 to 30 IOPS per user, what we'll see is around 297 IOPS per desktop with our persistent VDI technology, even bursting higher than that, up to 4,000 or 5,000 IOPS. So you can see a much better user experience, much more manageable for the IT operations team, and again for the CFO, much more inexpensive, cheaper to buy, cheaper to operate, and eliminating a lot of those hidden costs and risks. So to recap those challenges, cost per desktop, where traditional persistent VDI is more expensive than a PC, Atlantis ILIO is much cheaper than a PC. The user experience of traditional persistent VDI is slower than a PC, often much slower, and that's due to the storage sizing. To compare that, Atlantis ILIO has often been compared that it's faster than a MacBook Air. And the reason for that is that we're delivering so many IOPS, or so much performance on the storage side, that users would prefer to use a VDI desktop session through Atlantis than a traditional physical PC with local storage. From a flexibility point of view, remember, we've got limited storage and networking options when we're deploying a traditional persistent VDI. Really what we've got to have is SAN. Lots of traditional SAN and lots of traditional fiber channel switches. With Atlantis ILIO, we can use anything. We can use local server RAM, we can use flash, or we can use traditional SAN or NAS devices. Deployment time is greatly accelerated. So because we're eliminating all of that risk and uncertainty in the storage sizing, we don't have to go through rounds and rounds and rounds of user acceptance testing and benchmarking that you would have to do with traditional persistent VDI to figure out if you've bought just enough storage to make it work without breaking the bank. Instead, we can leverage our automation to be able to go live in weeks and trust that we've eliminated a lot of the uncertainty and risk around that sizing. From a deployment risk point of view, certainly we've eliminated the storage sizing risk, but also because of the automation, we've eliminated those other problems that are common to human error, configuration mistakes, and also disaster recovery, which is too costly to do with persistent VDI today because it means going to your disaster recovery site and buying just the same amount of SAN that you have at your primary site. We've simplified the architecture and we've enabled disaster recovery because you've reduced the storage footprint by so much that you've made it cost effective now to be able to do DR. And we've also introduced the automation needed to be able to quickly provision desktops in the need of a failure or in the event of a failure. And from a scalability point of view as well, it's very complex to scale out traditional VDI just because of the number of moving parts, the amount of storage. With Atlantis ILIO, we've got proven scalability, and we've shown that with our enterprise class customers, scaling into the tens of thousands on up to 100,000 desktops. So we'll share with you a few customer examples. This is from the U.S. Army Medical Command. They looked at Atlantis because they needed performance, but they also needed to save costs. They were rolling out desktops to nearly 9,000 doctors and nurses in 7 different hospitals spread around the globe. Their challenge was they had clinical applications to virtualize, but they saw storage bottlenecks with the traditional SAN that you would normally use to deploy virtual desktops. This was a Citrix FlexCast solution that was being delivered by HP Consulting and sold by one of our partners, WWT, on NetApp storage. What they found is that they were able to cut the storage footprint by 85%. They got faster response time, which means they spent less time staring at the screen waiting for things to pop up, and more time with patients. Now, the interesting thing that they said was, in our proof of concept testing, Atlantis ILIO offloaded in excess of 80% IOPS. ILIO reduced the storage capacity when provisioning virtual desktops by over 85%. So what this means is that not only did they need less SAN, but it also offloaded a lot of the I/O, or the throughput. So they needed less capacity and less throughput. So what that translates to is a lot less storage cost. One of our other customers, Washington Trust Bank, they looked at Atlantis ILIO to provide to to provide VDI performance. One of the challenges that they saw was that their storage CapEx was being completely negated by the total cost of ownership for VDI. They thought they had initially sized their VDI environment for 500 users, but they found that their deployment stalled at 90 users. This was because at the peak times of usage, they had to reach such I/O bottlenecks that it was really an unusable solution. This was a VMware view-based solution that was view end-to-end, vSphere 5, VMware View 5 with ThinApp and HA. A really interesting solution because when they implemented our technology to optimize their SAN, they got 5 times more users on the same EMC storage. An 875% increase in IOPS available to the desktops, and an 84% storage capacity reduction. Now this was just a great story because this is what we see in a lot of very typical use cases. Folks will go out and they'll size their storage expecting to be able to get many more users on it, but when they start to roll out, they find out that the traditional wisdom around VDI, that 10 to 20 IOPS per user, is not good enough. To get acceptable user experience, you have to size it much larger than that to get that better than physical user experience. So what they thought would be okay for 500 users, as it turned out, wasn't even good enough for 100 users. So what did they say about the Atlantis ILIO solution after they placed it into production? They said the storage processors on the SAN pegged out at 100% during the times of reported slowness, yet we thought we had plenty of horsepower. After deploying ILIO, IOPS were reduced on the bank SAN from 350 to 350 from about 3,500 IOPS reported previously. So we reduced their SAN load to about 10% of what it was previously. So they were able to roll out their full number of users and get great performance without having to go out and buy more SAN. So this was a great customer story. It was a great success story. They were able to salvage their project and get great performance on top of it. One of our other customers that we like to talk about is the Hawaii Medical Service. They bought Atlantis to solve a cost issue. Now, their users needed great performance, and they knew this, and so they had purchased Fusion IO cards to deliver that performance. But then they were faced with a cost problem. The CapEx and OpEx was high because they could only get 30 users on each Fusion IO card. Again, this was a VMware View solution based on Fusion IO. By using the Atlantis ILIO technology to optimize that piece of storage, now remember, Atlantis is a flexible solution, so you can use it on RAM, you can use it on traditional SAN or NAS, you can also use it on things like PCI or these Fusion IO cards. But by layering our technology on top of this Fusion IO storage, they were able to increase the density from 30 users per Fusion IO card to 200 users per Fusion IO card. That means that their cost per desktop went from 1,800 users down to 400 users. And they also got a 95% overall storage capacity reduction. So what Mark Choi said from the HMSA, or Hawaii Medical Service Association, was that before Atlantis ILIO, we were able to fit 30 desktops per Fusion IO memory device. With Atlantis, we can now get up to 200 virtual desktops. So this was a huge win for them. It cut costs, allowed them to grow and expand density without going out and buying more hardware. Remember, more hardware means not only more capital expense, but a lot of operational expense down the line as well. So why is Atlantis ILIO software unique? Well, we deliver the lowest cost per desktop faster than PC user experience. So where a lot of technologies are trying to get to an as good as user experience, or as good as physical PC user experience, we're already delivering better than physical experience. And we're the only solution for VDI and XenApp that can deliver this with no storage, leveraging server RAM as primary storage. We can get 4 to 10 times the number of users on any shared storage, including SSD and flash. And because of the automation and simplification that we bring to the table, we can reduce project risks and human errors. Remember, we're not just a storage software company and storage storage optimization company, but we bring some extra tooling to the table as well that's VDI specific to allow you to manage these projects. We can help you migrate from persistent to stateless as well with no infrastructure changes. And we do this all with just software, our Atlantis ILIO product. Atlantis is leading the industry. We're proven at scale. This ILIO technology is powering the largest desktop virtualization deployments in the world. As mentioned before, JPMorgan Chase is one of our flagship accounts. They're scaling above 90,000 users in production running on our technology. Just a fantastic technological achievement that they've been able to do that. And Atlantis storage optimization is the enabling technology for that deployment. We're able to cut costs, saving customers millions of dollars in CapEx and OpEx costs, and doing that with a high degree of flexibility on any kind of storage. We've been recognized with multiple industry awards in 2012 and also this year, 2013, at VMworld. And we're the trusted leaders and virtualization experts. And we're really poised to help you succeed in your projects as well, giving you a better than physical user experience, making your users happy, but also helping you to operationalize VDI in a way that makes it easier for you to manage, but also helps you to keep the costs in line, reduce the cost below that of a PC, and eliminate a lot of the hidden costs and risks that are associated with traditional VDI. So I appreciate very much your time this morning. We've got some time for some question and answers as well. So with that, I'll flip it back to our moderator, Carrie.
Okay, thank you guys. Our first question was, can you please explain how the cost of a desktop is $300? Yeah.
Sure. So in that user example, the cost of a desktop that was $300 was the full cost of a server and the ILIO software broken down by server density. So I believe in that particular example, it was a server with it was either 120 or 140 users was the specification on it, and that was the server cost with our software broken down by user.
Our next question refers back to the Bootup times. Are these times still relevant for disk-back persistent rollouts too?
That's a great question. So remember, the Atlantis ILIO Persistent technology for disk-backed is an optimization technology. So we're going to optimize whatever storage you put behind it. So the boot times are going to be dependent on really what kind of technology is behind it. So if we're optimizing SATA drives, that's going to be slightly different than if we're optimizing SAS drives or optimizing flash or what have you. So you're going to get slightly better times depending on the speed of the storage behind it. But what we see is that those boot times will vary a bit, but they won't vary very much from that. I hate to give you a mileage may vary kind of answer, but it really depends on what kind of storage you put behind on the disk-back solution and how much of it you put behind the ILIO software.
This we touched on in the presentation, but I guess we can go over it again. With typical ILIO deployments for persistent desktops, where is the user data typically stored?
That can be done in a couple of different ways. You can store it with persistent desktops. You can store the data actually in the desktop, or you can make use of things like SIS shares. Organizations, I've seen it done in both ways. So it's really just a matter of architectural preference. From an Atlantis point of view, we don't necessarily have a preference. I think it would depend really on the type, the nature of the data that you're going to be storing, and also what what kind of policies you have in place about how you let users store data and what types of data. Do you let them install applications? Do you let them, what kind of personal files do you allow them to keep? Are you allowing them to store things like ISO images or encrypted files? Those type of things would have a bearing on it. But you can allow user data to be in the image, in the ILIO data store, or you can keep it on SIF shares externally. We have customers that do both.
And then just going off of that, how does that affect the density of the image if it's stored in the image?
It's a great question. It will affect the density of the image depending on the type of data. So if you have if you have users doing user-installed applications, depending on the types of applications that they're installing, then it could affect the it could affect the image in a pretty broad way. I mean, if you've got people out there surfing the internet, just willy-nilly installing anything they want, without policies in place, then you could potentially end up with some pretty large images and get some pretty big backing disks. But then again, most people have policies in place around their VDI environments that would limit that.
Okay, our next question is, what is the mix of stateless versus persistent at JP Morgan and Chase?
That is a great question. I do not actually have an answer to that, so I couldn't comment on it. Sorry.
How has the user interface improved for better management?
So that's also a very good question. So we introduced a product called ILIO Center, ILIO Management Center, and with that ILIO Management Center, we provide the ability to monitor the ILIO appliances, to patch and maintain the ILIO appliances, to report on metrics such as appliance health, whether or not appliances are in degraded states based on the hardware that they're on. If a host is experiencing problems, maybe a host is experiencing excessive CPU load, and so we can report that back up through into the ILIO Management Center. We've also provided the ability to perform other operational tasks, things like taking a snapshot of a server, do fast cloning, which is another one of our technologies, through the ILIO Management Center, as well as managing licensing, patch levels, and a few other things through that ILIO Management Center. Things like SNMP reporting. So yeah, the interface has gotten a lot more robust in the last year.
Okay. Are there any provisions for small businesses with less than 100 users?
Actually, there are. There are some bundles that are out there. I would encourage you to reach out to your reseller, your Atlantis reseller, to find out about those. And if you don't have an Atlantis reseller that you're currently working with, hit our website and follow the sales link and request some information about some of the packages that we've got right now for some of our smaller customers.
Can the Atlantis Persistent VDI solution be used with Citrix VDI in a box? Yes.
So again, I would encourage you to reach out to your local rep about and schedule a call with your local SE to discuss how that would happen.
How does Atlantis assist customers to move from persistent to stateless desktops?
So from persistent to stateless desktop, that's a great question. So persistent to stateless desktops, we allow you to do it really with the same kind of tooling. So from our point of view, a desktop is kind of a desktop is a desktop. A lot of people start out with stateless or start out with persistent because it's easier. You can use the same kind of tools to manage and monitor a persistent image as you do with as you would with a physical PC. They don't go to stateless right away because you do have to change your processes and your images. So a lot of people will do the persistent desktops, first. What we find is that some customers, once they deploy on Atlantis, they're happy to stay in a persistent state because they're getting the performance that they need. One of the things that stateless and non-persistent gets you is a reduction in storage footprint and some operational benefits. Atlantis brings you a lot of those benefits out of the box as well, and so some people are content to stay there. If you want to get to a persistent or a non-persistent environment, then we have the ILIO technology for non-persistent deployments as well. That is basically built on the same code base. So you can stand up ILIO data stores and migrate, storage migrate VMs right into those data stores as well. We don't have technology per se that helps you, change processes to get from a persistent to a non-persistent state, but the same storage platform can be used for, or the same general storage platform can be used for persistence and non-persistent, so you don't have to go out and train your storage guys to manage, basically a new storage platform for non-persistence, as maybe you would if you were deploying on flash for non-persistence or on SSD arrays for non-persistence.
Okay. If ILIO is optimizing RAM as a solution, do we really have a persistent desktop?
Yes, so we have a technology called InMemory Persistent. It is a two-tiered architecture where we run the ILIO or the persistent desktop in RAM and then replicate the persistent blocks down to another ILIO appliance that will then write them to SAN or NAS for backup and recovery. It's a really interesting technology. You can jump out on our website and find out more about it. It's called Persistent in Memory, but it uses server RAM as the primary storage for the desktop's runtime or storage runtime, and then SAN or NAS for backup and recovery. Extremely fast, high performance, and just a really interesting technology.
Are performance metrics only available within the management center, or can specific info be extracted to appear on, say, website reporting, etc.?
Good question. So out of the box, no. There is some metrics that you can gather from command line if you kind of know what you're doing, but without the ILIO Management Center, there's not really a clean way to do that at this time.
On a typical DL380G8 with 256 gigabytes of RAM, how much memory has to be dedicated to storage, and what was the VDI density on that host?
That's a good question. As far as sizing, you can figure on about 22 gig of RAM kind of as table stakes for the appliance to get up and running, and then about 150 megabytes of RAM per user above that. There's also, you need to figure on about 3% of the size of the backing disk. So to kind of net that out, as far as how many users, we would need to know what the core count is. But I would say that the ILIO appliance is probably going to take up somewhere between 22 and 40 gig of RAM. So depending on how much RAM you allocate to your users, you're going to have, ballpark, 100 plus users. Now that's very back of napkin. We would need to look at your core count, figure out how many users per host, or I'm sorry, how many users per core you would want to use, and how much RAM per user. But we could certainly help you with the sizing for that.
I've received a few questions regarding upcoming webinar schedules and the recording availability. Those will be made available to you next week. So to continue on with the questions, we probably have time for one or two more. Will ILIO Center be supported on Zen server? As of now, it's only supported on VMware.
That is true, and unfortunately, I can't comment on futures in this webinar.
With ILIO on a top-of-rack config to allow shared storage and persistence, don't you have the same network load that you would if you were connected to SAN as your shared storage?
Good question. Yeah, the top-of-rack configurations are no longer really supported. So what we would suggest is on each server. Although you can configure manually a top-of-rack, it's not a best practice and it's no longer a supported configuration. But you are correct. You would be dragging the network traffic across or the storage traffic across the network. But that's one of the reasons why we no longer that's one of the reasons why we no longer support that architecture.
Okay, and then the last question: are there different licenses required for persistent, stateless, console, etc.?
Yes. So check with your SE and your sales rep or your account manager for which licenses would be appropriate. But there are different licenses based on the use case, whether it's going to be stateless, persistent, and even within the use case, because of the types of technology. For instance, persistent in memory or stateless in memory is going to be different than stateless on disk. So to make sure that you get the correct licensing, be sure and check with them, and they'll make sure that they get you the right licenses.
Okay, that's all the time we have for today, guys. So thank you so much for joining us. As I said, we will be emailing out a link to the recording. And if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to reach out via our website. Thank you.